Buckle up, folks, because today we're diving headfirst into a real philosophical hotbed, a pressure cooker even.
Yeah.
We're talking the condemnation of 1277, straight out of 1277 Paris. Big year, big event. This was a full-on intellectual smackdown, 219 philosophical and theological theses banned, just like that. Did you imagine? Thought itself outlawed?
It's really wild when you think about it, right? The power dynamics back then, faith versus reason, especially when they clash head on like that.
Totally. And to make things even juicier for a philosophy nerd like me, the condemnation document, it's super vague. Doesn't name names, no specific culprits. It's like a historical puzzle, piecing together clues to figure out who these radical thinkers were and what they did to make such a splash.
Yeah, exactly. A total mystery.
So to guide us through this philosophical labyrinth, we're turning to our trusty companion, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, specifically their entry on the condemnation of 1277. And you know what's really fascinating? Even the Pope's role in all this is shrouded in mystery. We know Pope John the 21st. He sent a letter mentioning heresy, but there's evidence he might not have known about the actual condemnation until after the fact. What do you make of that?
Yeah. Weeks later, he's asking for details, like who is spreading these ideas, almost as if he was totally out of the loop to begin with. I mean,
Yeah.
it makes you wonder, right? What was the real motivation behind all this? Was it just about stamping out dangerous ideas, or was it more about, Bishop Tempier flexing his authority?
Right, power play.
Or even, think about this, what if there were these underlying political currents within the university itself? I mean, things can get pretty cutthroat in academia even back then.
Yeah, you're right. So let's talk about these thinkers. Who are these brave souls daring to challenge the intellectual status quo? The names that always pop up are Siger of Brabant and Boethius of Dacia. Were they the masterminds behind this whole thing?
Well, it's not that simple, is it? Sure, they were playing around with some of these condemned themes, but just pinning the blame on them or on, one specific philosophical school like Averroism, that's a bit too easy, don't you think?
Okay, so maybe not the masterminds.
Right. Averroism itself, it's become this kind of catch-all term used to describe all sorts of different interpretations of Averroes, the Islamic philosopher. It's way more nuanced than that. We're talking a clash of titans here, different interpretations of Aristotle, all trying to fit within the framework of Christian theology.
So more of a philosophical ecosystem than a rogue group of troublemakers.
Exactly. A whole bunch of different ideas bubbling up, clashing, creating this real intellectual ferment.
I like that, intellectual ferment.
Yeah.
And to really get a taste of that, can you give us an example of one of these condemned ideas, something that really showcases this whole tension between faith and reason?
All right, picture this. One of the condemned propositions, it states that God couldn't create a camel without a heart. Sounds a bit random, right?
Yeah, kind of out there.
But it actually gets at a really deep philosophical debate. It's about the soul's power of impression, and whether God's actions are bound by certain logical or metaphysical rules. Can a truly all-powerful being just defy the fundamental principles of existence? Or is even divine power, subject to some kind of order?
Whoa, that's huge. It makes you realize that these medieval debates, they weren't just some abstract theological squabbles. They were grappling with questions that still blow our minds today.
Totally. And we're just scratching the surface here. The condemned propositions cover all sorts of philosophical and theological battlegrounds. You've got questions about the eternity of the world, the nature of the soul, the limits of human knowledge, all these hot topics being debated.
Really makes you think. Okay, but before we get too lost in the weeds here, we got to address this big bad elephant in the room, this common misconception about the whole double truth theory.
Yes, the infamous double truth.
Right. The idea that these scholars, they believed in two separate truths, two different realities, one for philosophy and one for faith, potentially even contradictory.
Right, and it's crucial to clarify that no serious scholar at the time actually believed this.
Okay, so where did this idea come from?
I think it was more of a rhetorical strategy, Bishop Tempier using it to kind of, criticize what he saw as this attempt to separate philosophical inquiry from the authority of the church. Like he was saying, look, you can't have it both ways. You can't say something's true philosophically and then deny its theological validity.
So more about maintaining control over the intellectual discourse than actual philosophical differences.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment.
Makes sense. All right, speaking of control, let's talk fallout. What happened after the hammer dropped? Did this condemnation actually work? Did it achieve what it set out to do?
Well, there's no doubt it had a chilling effect on some scholars. Like we see Peter of Ava, and he actually revises his views on some key issues after the condemnation, the eternity of the world, stuff like that. Speaks volumes, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
It shows you the kind of power these authorities held over intellectual life.
Yeah, you don't want to get on their bad side. But, on the flip side, couldn't this suppression have actually, like, inadvertently pushed philosophers to become more strategic? Like, force them to develop new, even more refined arguments?
Oh, that's a really interesting thought. Yeah, it's like when you squeeze a balloon, right? The air's got to go somewhere.
I see what you mean.
And to make things even more interesting, Tempier wasn't done yet. That same year, he launched two more condemnations, targeting no other than Thomas Aquinas and Giles of Rome.
Wait, hold on. Thomas Aquinas,
Hey.
the Aquinas, the big name in theology. You're telling me he got caught up in this too?
Yep. It seems Tempier was on a roll, making it clear who was in charge.
Wow. So it wasn't just about targeting specific ideas then. It was more about, like, consolidating power.
It definitely suggests that, right? I mean, Aquinas and Giles of Rome, they were both big deal theologians, but they disagreed on certain points. So it looks like Tempier was aiming for overall control over the theological faculty, not just eliminating certain doctrines.
It's like he was drawing a line in the sand and saying, this is my turf. Talk about a power move.
Yeah.
Makes you think about the impact on universities back then, as these centers of thought and debate, how they were navigating this relationship with the church.
Oh, absolutely. Universities in the 13th century were still pretty new, figuring out their place in the world. This condemnation of 1277, it's like a key moment in that whole process, showing the tension between these emerging institutions and the powers that be.
Right, so it was this back and forth between, like, freedom of thought on one side, championed by these new universities, and control on the other, held tight by the church. I'm curious, did the condemnation really put a stop to intellectual progress, or did it, in some weird way, actually make things more interesting, more nuanced?
It's a tough question, a real double-edged sword. On the one hand, it created this atmosphere of fear. Philosophers had to watch their step.
Yeah, can't imagine the pressure.
Think about it, you're a scholar back then. Knowing one wrong word could land you in hot water with the church. That's intense.
Not exactly an environment for free-flowing debate. But, like you said, double-edged sword, right. On the other hand, couldn't this pressure have pushed philosophers to become more creative, more subtle in their arguments?
Yeah, you're right. Sometimes constraints can breed innovation. Like the old saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Maybe this whole event, while initially limiting, actually pushed philosophical inquiry into new, uncharted territory. Like those condemned ideas, they went underground, simmering beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to pop up again.
I like that image, going underground. It's like a philosophical seed being planted, right? Even buried under all this authority, it still had the potential to sprout, grow in new and unexpected ways. And it's interesting, this wasn't that far off from the Renaissance, with its renewed interest in classical thought and a more human-centered perspective.
That's a great point. It really makes you think about how ideas, even when they're suppressed, can find new ways to express themselves. Maybe the seeds of what we consider modern scientific and philosophical thought, they were already there, even amidst all the restrictions and controversies of that time.
So instead of putting out the fire of intellectual curiosity, the condemnation might have actually made it burn even brighter.
That's pretty powerful. But let's bring it back to the present for a sec. What are the key takeaways from all this for someone grappling with philosophical questions today?
Well, I think the condemnation of 1277 is a stark reminder of this complex and often messy relationship between faith and reason. It's a debate that's still very much alive, even now. It highlights the fact that these two spheres, they're not always neatly separated. They intersect, they overlap, sometimes they clash in surprising ways.
Yeah, you're right. It makes you think about current debates around science and religion, academic freedom, even the very nature of truth. We're still wrestling with these same questions that were echoing through the halls of the University of Paris back in 1277.
Absolutely. The condemnation is like a historical mirror, reflecting back our own anxieties and uncertainties. It forces us to confront those age-old questions. Where do we draw the line between acceptable and unacceptable ideas? Who gets to decide what can be questioned and what has to be accepted as absolute truth? Big questions, big implications. Reminds us that this whole idea of intellectual freedom It's not a given. It's something we have to constantly work for,
Yeah.
a delicate balance that can easily tip one way or the other.
Totally. And it underlines the huge responsibility that comes with intellectual freedom. As philosophers, as citizens, we have this duty to engage with these debates thoughtfully, listen to different perspectives, and stand up for the principles of open inquiry.
It's like a torch being passed down through generations, a call to keep searching for knowledge, even when it challenges the status quo. Maybe that's the most important legacy of the condemnation of 1277. Makes you wonder, right? Like if we were suddenly dropped into 1277 Paris, right in the middle of all this, where would we stand? Would we be the ones risking it all for an idea? Would we risk, condemnation?
That's the real question, isn't it? It's not just some history lesson, dates and names. It's about us, our values, what we're willing to stand up for. It forces us to look in the mirror and ask, okay, where do I draw the line? What's orthodoxy and what's heresy? What can we talk about? What's off limits?
Especially for us as philosophers, right?
Yeah.
The whole point is to question, to dissect arguments, to get to the bottom of things. But then you think about those condemned propositions, the ones about God's power, the limits of reason, like just imagining God creating a camel without a heart could get you in trouble.
Yeah.
So where's the space for real, genuine, philosophical inquiry?
And that's why this whole condemnation of 1277, it's not just some dusty old event, it's alive. It's relevant for philosophers today. It shows us this tension, this constant back and forth between accepting what we're told and pushing the boundaries, asking those tough questions. Can faith and reason really get along? Or are they always going to be at odds? And if they can coexist, what are the rules? These questions, they've been around for centuries, and they're not going away anytime soon.
It's like the condemnation didn't solve anything. It just made the questions even bigger, more important. And maybe instead of silencing debate, it actually forced philosophical inquiry to change, to evolve, find new ways to express itself.
Exactly. And that's a huge takeaway from all this. That human desire to learn, to understand our place in the cosmos, it's powerful, it's resilient, you can challenge it, suppress it, even force it to adapt, but it's always going to find a way to come back.
It makes you wonder what radical ideas are floating around today, right? What uncomfortable truths are waiting to be discovered? Who are the brave ones who are going to speak up?
Those are the questions that keep philosophers up at night. We can't predict the future, but we can learn from the past. The condemnation of 1277, it's a reminder, a warning even, that the fight for intellectual freedom, it's never really over. We have to stay vigilant, question everything, and keep those conversations going, even when they get tough, even when they make us uncomfortable.
Well, I think we've all had a good dose of uncomfortable today, and I got to say, it's been a wild ride.
Yeah, for sure.
This whole journey, tracing the threads of these philosophical debates through time, it's amazing how something that happened over 700 years ago can still feel so relevant today.
Absolutely. And as always, we encourage you to check out the source material for yourself. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry on the condemnation of 1277, it's a goldmine, packed with details and insights. Maybe this deep dive will inspire you to do some philosophical time traveling of your own.
And until next time, keep those minds sharp, those questions flowing, and keep that philosophical fire burning.